Today's scripture is from the book of Matthew, chapter 16, verses 13 through 23. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." This is the word of the Lord.
I realized the other day that it's been about a year since Emily and I combined our households and moved into a new house. And do you ever remember like that time you move into a new place? It feels like certain rooms get settled relatively quickly as far as where everything goes, and they pretty much stay there, and certain rooms do not, right? And they tend to get shifted around a lot. And in our house, one of those rooms that's gone through a lot of iterations has been the living room. And like most living rooms, when you enter the house, you go through it. If you want to move from the bathroom to the kitchen, you go through the living room. It's kind of that focal point in the house, which is probably why we're constantly trying to figure out, its best arrangement. And by we, I don't mean me because I don't care. But one of the things that Emily brought into the house was this amazing coffee table made out of a large piece of wood that was actually salvaged from the big flood in 2014 in Lyons. And somebody had taken it and made this amazing coffee table thing out of it. And I really love it. And it's a wonderful little centerpiece for the room. And when we're together watching TV or whatever, I often put my drinks on it, put my put my feet up on it, whatever it is. Use it the way that a coffee table's intended to be used. And it's really helpful and useful in that regard. And so for that way, it's a tremendous asset. Now, there was one time when I got up in the middle of the night and needed to go and get something out of the kitchen that in my middle of the night stupor had sort of forgotten that the living room had been rearranged. Because Emily's mother had been visiting and they decided that they wanted to try it a different way, which of course I nodded along like a good husband and said, "Whatever you want, dear, that sounds great." But unfortunately, in that process, the coffee table moved too, and I failed to remember that the coffee table moved too. And while I left the room dark so I would not turn on lights to wake up everybody else, of course, I found the new where the coffee table lived now with my shin, rather hard and abruptly. And so now, in an attempt to not wake everybody up, I'm now stifling back the scream I want to let it out because my knee really, really hurts because, as I mentioned, it's a solid wood coffee table. And in that argument between me and it wins. So it's the same thing, right? It's the same object. In one hand, when I know where it is and it's where I want it to be and I'm using it as intended, it is a wonderful addition to our household. In the other iteration, even though it has not changed, when it is not where I expect it to be, and I am not using it the way that is intended to be used, it becomes something else. And that really is what we're talking about today in this passage. So Jesus uses two metaphors very, very close together, and different translations translate things differently. But in the traditional translation, in the beginning, Jesus is talking about Peter as a cornerstone, which is actually a physical piece of rock, right? It is a stone, right? And in the beginning, and that is a good thing. And then only moments later in the scripture, Peter is being rebuked by Jesus, and in the more traditional translations, he is now called a stumbling block. And what we need to remember as we encounter this passage is that cornerstones and stumbling blocks can physically be the same thing, right? A large stone, a cornerstone is a large stone that is placed in the corner of a building, and today they tend to be rather ceremonial, right? You will find cornerstones outside on our building here or on municipal buildings or whatever, and oftentimes there's a little pomp and circumstance that goes to when we're laying the cornerstone, which tends to be more of a symbolic act anymore. But in Jesus' day, that's not the way that it worked. Right? Because they didn't have modern building techniques and all the things that we had today. So what you would do is you would take, one large, fairly square, fairly uniform stone, and you would take a lot of time and energy and effort to make sure that that one stone was level and exactly where you wanted it to be, because everything else would be built off of it. And if the cornerstone literally was not level, then the entire building at the end of the day would not be level, because they did not have the technology that we have today. So being a cornerstone, metaphorically, or physically being a cornerstone, is an incredibly important thing, especially in Jesus' day, because it is the thing that gives direction and all of that to all the other stones that will come after it. But at the end of the day, it is still just a stone. It is still a rock that came out of the ground. A stumbling block is something similar. It can physically be the same thing. The question, only difference is, where is it, and what is your intention, or how is it that you encounter it? A cornerstone of an old dilapidated building that has fallen down become a set of ruins can very easily become a stumbling block that somebody else trips over. They are the same. So we have this moment between Peter and Jesus, where Jesus comes and quizzes Peter and says, "Who is it that you say that I am?" And Peter gives the right answer, which is to say, "You are the Messiah." And for this, he is announced and proclaimed to be, "You, Peter, are the cornerstone. You are going to be the first of all of these 12 and all of the multitude that come after you. You will be the one that gives level and direction to what comes next." No doubt, Peter felt really good in this moment. Right? We've talked about Peter so far. He comes from a humble background. He was a fisherman with a bunch of skills and attributes that God saw, but most everybody else didn't. Right? And so now we're much more forward in the story. Peter and Jesus have been hanging out for a while. Peter's starting to catch on. He's starting to see what's going on. And Jesus gives him this little quiz and gives him this little test of, "Who is it that you say that I am?" And Peter passes the test and is given this amazing pronouncement of who it is that he is and who it is that he will be. And so it's interesting that only a few passages later, Jesus' tone and tenor towards Peter changes dramatically. And now we get this, and I love the way, if you can't quite see it, but if you zoom in on the painting a little bit, that Jesus is giving Peter the talk to the hand moment. Right? So Peter is no doubt feeling good. He's feeling confident. He's like, "I'm the cornerstone. I've got this figured out." And then Jesus goes on and continues to teach and says, "Oh, by the way, I am the Messiah, and part of what the Messiah is going to have to do is the Messiah and me as the Messiah. I'm going to have to go to Jerusalem, and there I'm going to suffer. And not only am I going to suffer, I'm going to die. And it's not going to be for my sake, but it's going to be for yours." And this new information, in the stream of information that Peter's been receiving this whole time, this new piece of information is not something for whatever reason Peter can handle. He's like, no. He's like, that's not how, in Peter's mind, messiahs work. That's not what messiahs do. And so while Jesus is proclaiming that this is what's going to happen, Peter goes to him quietly and says, Jesus, as your cornerstone, let me set you straight on some things, which is a great start. And he's like, you can't talk like this. You're the Messiah, and we know what that means. And it doesn't mean what it is that you're saying. And so in that moment, the cornerstone, the thing that is supposed to be, everything's supposed to be built on, becomes something else. Peter becomes something else in that time. And Jesus rebukes him and says, no, you're wrong. You don't understand completely yet. And now you are becoming a stumbling block. Now, Peter has reason for thinking the way that he thinks, right? Because for Peter, when he thinks about a Messiah and what a Messiah is, all he can do is look back on the examples from the past. And some of those are listed for us in the scripture when Jesus asks, who do they say that I am? And they list some of the prophets, and they list John the Baptist, and they list all these important people from the past. But they were not the Messiah, and people knew that. So when Peter comes and says, oh, wait a minute, I know who you are the Messiah, he's not thinking about John the Baptist or Elijah or any of those people. Who Peter is no doubt thinking about is he's thinking about Moses, and he's thinking about David, and he's thinking about those larger-than-life figures from his own religious history, and that played that role of Messiah to God's people. That's what he is no doubt thinking about. And one thing that both of those people have in common, David and Moses and those like them have in common, is that when Moses confronts Pharaoh, Pharaoh does not kill Moses. When David confronts Goliath, Goliath does not kill David. So for Jesus to go and say, not only I am the Messiah, but this is going to play out differently this time, Peter can't handle it because in his mind, he is looking backwards towards what being a Messiah meant before and failing to grasp that Jesus actually came at this time and at this place to do something new and different. Yes, Jesus will be a Messiah in the way that, in some ways, the way David and Moses was, but Jesus as being the Messiah is going to be different. What he will do is going to be different. He's not going to have multiple decades of life and ministry and teachings the way Moses and David did. They had long tenures as leaders of the Jewish people. Jesus isn't going to have that. He's only going to be with them for a short time. History says about 3 years, instead of the multiple decades from before. And of course, we know where the story goes, and we know what ends up happening to Jesus. And of course, Jesus is the one in this little encounter that is correct. Jesus has to be a different kind of Messiah that Peter can't understand yet, because Peter is looking backwards, and Jesus is looking at the world as it is today and looking forward to what he knows and what God knows is to come. Now, it's sometimes been speculated and often wondered, why is it that Jesus came at the time that he did? And there's really nothing in Scripture that says Jesus came, why Jesus chose, and why God chose to come in the form of Jesus at the time that he did, other than to say it was, in fact, the right time, because, again, this is God and Jesus. So they would know, right? And so now we can look back and we can speculate, but no doubt there's no end of reasons why God chose that time to come in the form of Jesus. But one of them, no doubt, was just the state of the world as it was at that moment and the opportunities that it presented. Because while most of the people in Jesus' own religious community were looking around and hoping the Messiah would be the one that would actually kick the Roman occupiers out, we've talked about that a lot. They're looking at the burden of being occupied by Rome. They're seeing all of that, and they're saying, we'd like to be done with that now. They are failing to take into account everything else that came with it. If you think about the world today and the modern world and all the things that we've inherited and when certain things were invented or when ideas came in to human consciousness and being, when you think about the massive progress and leaps that we've made as a people and as a species, you can usually track most of those back to one of two things, either the Roman Empire or the Chinese. They basically invented everything, right? I mean, if you're a student of history and like history like I do, and you kind of wonder where certain things came from, inevitably, if you trace something back far enough, you're going to end up in one of those two places. Because the Romans, for all of the things, all the baggage they brought with them, also brought a lot of other things with them. Because the Roman Empire changed the world and how the world works more so than almost anybody else. They built roads, they built bridges. Even today, if you are unlucky enough to have to spend any time engaging in our legal system for any reason, you will notice that when we talk about legal laws and rules and precedents and all that kind of stuff, if you dig into how it is that our legal system works, you're eventually going to run into some words that are in Latin. Why are they in Latin? Because the legal system as we know it today, this idea of law and order as we know it today, was really invented in Rome, which is why we still use the Latin terms today. And no doubt it was Rome that popularized and began to really use and take advantage of things like cornerstones. They built impressive things for multiple centuries. There are concrete buildings that were built 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire that still stand today. And there are examples of concrete that we have only just figured out why it is as good as it is, because the Romans were just so darn good at using it. They built roads, they provided safe passage. It is arguable that all the things that the disciples would do, all the places that Peter would travel, all the things that Paul would do, taking the message of Jesus to all the far-flung places he took it to, would not be possible except for the infrastructure that Rome built. Jesus looks around and sees the opportunity of the time and place he is living in. He recognizes that he's living in a time and a place where he can bring this profound message, he can do this profound thing, and that profound thing and all of those teachings are not going to stay simply contained into the world that Jesus was born and ministered into, but now had the opportunity to travel far and wide. And he needs his disciples to see and understand that that is their opportunity too. In order for Peter to truly become the cornerstone he needs to be, he needs to stop looking backwards to what he assumes and thinks messiahs are from the past, but he needs to see what's going on right then and right there, and what opportunities lie in front of him and of Jesus, not only in those days and weeks to come, but for the years and the centuries to follow. When Peter does that, then he becomes the cornerstone that Jesus needs him to be. Now, we have all spent most of our entire lives, in fact, everybody in this room has spent their entire lifespan in a time when there is great and rapid change and progress all around us. That was not standard for a long time. That is not the normal human existence for a long time. Peter and Jesus are living through a time of transition and progress as far as humans and what we are capable of doing. That was really one of the first times that really ever happened. And now we ourselves have spent the last century living through the same thing. So we need to have a little grace for those who came before us, because they have not had the same experiences that we have. Because the world that we live in today continues to grow and progress all the time. And one of the ways that we can see this most clearly is in things like business and companies that come and go and the work that they do. Now, in 1886, William Durant founded the Durant-Dort Carriage Company, which in the beginning was actually a really beneficial and useful carriages, because in the late 19th century, you needed things like carriages, right? That are meant to be haul heavy things and be hauled behind horses and things like that. And they got really good at it. They got so good at it, in fact, that they became the dominant carriage maker in the United States by the year 1900. And no doubt at the time they thought, this is great, this is wonderful. We built this tremendous, amazing business that will no doubt continue to grow and continue to develop, because when will there ever be a time when we don't need carriages, right? Like, we'll always are going to have to carry stuff, right? And we're not going to want to do it by hand. So when will we not need carriages that are hauled behind horses? Well, if you remember, or through those time in those days, in the 1900s, by even 1910, the world has changed, right? Because something else came along that we called in the beginning the horseless carriage, right? And so somebody invented, and there was somebody looked at this thing and said, what's great about the horse and the carriage is the fact that it can carry stuff. What's not so great about it is the horse. Horses are stinky. They take a lot of time and energy and effort, right? They take a lot of care and feeding. They are not easy pets, right? And or even to have around. And so the other people and other businesses began to come into the scene. And there's a decent chance that you have never heard of the Durant Door Carriage Company because it ceased to exist in the 1920s. Now, one of the founders, William Durant, though, could see what was coming. He had built this successful company on the back of horses and carriages, a technology that had been existed and perfected at that point for centuries. The Romans had horses and carriages, right? It had been technology forever, and it would be easy to assume that that is the technology that would continue to be dominant forever. But William was smart enough to see that the world was changing and there were new opportunities at that time. And so he decided to take the proceeds and what and all of the materials and all of the resources that had been developed during the development of this amazing, prosperous carriage company, and take those resources and funnel them into something new. So 30 years after starting and being the founder of this particular carriage company, he went on to found a different company that we know today as General Motors. William Durant was one of the two founders of this and one of the two founders of General Motors because he could see where things were going. And he could see that the cornerstone of his existing business, the horse and the carriage, was about to become something else. It was about to become a stumbling block. And for carriage companies that couldn't see that and couldn't make that transition and assumed that things were just going to continue the way that they always had, it became that. To the point where at the time the Durant company was around, there were over 1,000 carriage makers in the United States. There's only a handful left today because we don't use them in the same way we used to. There are no end of examples of this. There are no end of graveyards out there full of companies and businesses and business plans that used to exist and used to have a big, thing, and that bet themselves on something that would eventually change. There are also myriad of examples of companies that were able to make the transition from one thing, or organizations that were able to make the transition from one thing to something else. All of these firms and even this country went through in times that could have been their undoing, that could have been their end. If you walk down the toy aisle, you might be surprised to learn that Lego once had a time when it was about this close from bankruptcy, until it realized that instead of trying to do things the way they'd always do it, they needed to embrace a different way. And even modern and new companies that we think of, companies that only were born within my personal lifespan, like Apple and Microsoft, went through these problems. And it was only after they were able to see where the world was going, not simply where they had been, were they able to transition and to become successful again. All of us have things in our lives. As we move through our lives, we are creatures that grow and develop. Culture and society was growing and developing around the disciples and around Jesus, and Jesus chose to take advantage of that. William Durant saw that technology and the culture around him was changing and shifting, and he was able to take advantage of that. We all, as individuals, grow and develop and change throughout our lives. And things that served us well, traits, attributes, places we spend our time, energy, and effort that served us well in previous years, may not serve us as well today. Things that we understand to be the cornerstones of who we are and what it is that we do and who it is that we are called to be. Yes, for a time that may be true, but as we grow, as we mature, as God continues to work in our lives, as the Spirit continues to move on our lives, and the world continues to grow and progress around us, it may be that we encounter a time where we have to reevaluate what our cornerstones truly are to avoid them becoming stumbling blocks. One of the most challenging times that in ministry that I've had to walk with people through is those times later in life where we recognize that we are not able to do all of the things that we did as a youth. As a young person, our independence, the fact that we could go and we could strive and we could work hard and we could labor, is something we took pride and excitement in. We built our identity around. And yet, as we grow, as we age, and if we are blessed to move into what we call our golden years, we have to confront the reality that we're not able to do all of the things. We are not able to do all of the things in the same way that we were once able to do. And many of us will encounter a point where things like our sense of independence that fueled us when we were younger may be holding us back when we are older, when we need to open ourselves up to the reality that we need to rely a little bit more on those around us, that we're not able to do all of the things we used to be able to do. Even in my life, I've run into this from time to time. There are times I really, really miss having my 6'3", 20-year-old son around to do the heavy lifting that I no longer wish, desire, or am able to do. Throughout our lives, we will have different cornerstones. They may be the relationships and the people around us. They may be the careers or professions we choose to involve ourselves in. It may be our education. It may be our family and our children, or whatever it is. We have these cornerstones we build our lives around. But as I've recently discovered, one of those, of course, for me is being a dad. And as I'm starting to transition to not only to sending off my children into the world on their own, my son moved out 3 months ago. I'm okay with it. My daughter's starting high school. That's great. I recognize my role in their lives is shifting. How I use my status as a father is shifting. And that cornerstone is getting a little smaller. We all face these times in life. We all have things that we recognize that are important parts of us. And they can and they should be. But all of us are also inhabiting bodies and inhabiting a world that changes and shifts because we worship a God that is continually moving, continually changing. We get to live in this place and this time, and we get to be blessed by the Spirit that moves within us. So we must ask ourselves these questions from time to time. What are my cornerstones today? What am I aligning my life and my resources to today? What may have shifted around me or inside of me that causes me to maybe shift what those cornerstones are? Peter will make this shift. As we continue on in the story, he will truly become the cornerstone that Jesus needs him to be. His status as stumbling block is only temporary. We ourselves are given those same opportunities again and again. So we should take some time to think about, to consider, what are the cornerstones of our lives? What are the things that make us who we are, the things we align ourselves to? What makes us us? What identities, what names do we wear? And what did that maybe mean before? And what might God want us to think about it? How might God want to bring new meaning to it today? Amen.